and gentlemen. Ladies and gentlemen, I was wondering if you could take your seats, please. Ladies and gentlemen, I won't say it's a Herculean task to get you to sit down. It's probably more a task worthy of Minerva. Table 31. Ladies and gentlemen, well, that actually wasn't bad. That was only about 6 requests to sit down. Last year it took about 8. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for being here this evening. On behalf of the President and the Dinner Committee of Chief Executive Women, I'd like to welcome you one and all to the dinner. And I'd like to particularly welcome Amanda Wilson, from the editor of the Sydney Morning Herald, our special guest speaker tonight. My name is Sue Cato, and I am your Master of Ceremonies this evening. I have to say, having had a chance to wander through the room earlier, the representation of corporate Australia, various parts of charity, etc., in fact all walks of life, it's wonderful to have you here. And I might say we've been overwhelmed by corporate Australia's support for this dinner. We actually sold out in 9 days this year. And that with no public sales, it was to sponsors and members and the people who have, work with these people. So quite an extraordinary event. Quite frankly, we probably could have sold the dinner twice, but as I said, thank you all for being here. I think probably a room like this shows that Australia and the wider community recognises that diversity in leadership, in all parts of leadership and in all levels of leadership, is really finally starting to get traction. But Belinda, our President, will be speaking in a few moments, or a little later in the evening, so I'll let her go into more detail. Why don't I get down to the detail of how the evening's going to work? There's no way in the universe that we think that we could have speeches and interrupt conversations, so the business part of the evening doesn't start till after dinner's actually occurred. I'll then invite Belinda Hutchinson to come to the table, or come to the stage and speak to you. She'll then introduce Amanda Wilson. And after that, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to have a raffle. And the raffle's quite important because the raffle is the way we pay for our scholarships, and that's why we're here tonight. We've got 3 different levels of scholarships that we're working with at the moment. One is the International Executive Studies Scholarship, and that's at Harvard. That's co-funded by us and the Women's Leadership Institute. Thank you very much, Carol Schwartz, who established that institute. We also have 3 programs at INSEAD in Singapore. Now, those scholarships are aimed at women at different parts of their corporate development. So there'll be some for women who've actually never been a manager but aspire to be a manager. There'll be some for women who have just started management and are continuing on. And then the 3rd level of sponsorships we have are with the AICD. They're co-funded by the Australian Scholarship Foundation, and they're particularly aimed at assisting women becoming leaders and NEDs in the not-for-profit sector. So that's what tonight is all about, and so can I urge you to buy raffle tickets. We've got some fabulous volunteers from Qantas and also friends and family of CEW, and they're all young and fantastic, and I'm hoping that they are diligently but sweetly badgering you. What I would like to say in terms of the raffle is it's a fabulous raffle. We've got over $80,000 worth of prizes donated tonight, and I'd like to take a moment, if I may, to actually give you an idea of who these terrific people are. So Qantas have provided the 1st and 2nd prizes. Qantas has been a long-term supporter of CEW and we really value their support. We've also got Great Southern Rail, Longines, Telstra, the Gwingana Lifestyle Retreat, Carla Zampatti and Oroton, Dick Smith, Carnival Cruises, Lemur, Joe Malone, Sheridan and Tontine and Hunt Leather. Thank you to all of them. And I might also note, and you'll see up during the evening, our formal dinner sponsors, and Belinda Hutchinson will speak to them during her comments. And for those of you with a wine in your hand, and I won't ask people to hold up hands, I'd like to thank Dan Murphy's, who once again have provided the wine for tonight, and all the wines are made by female winemakers. So, okay. So as promised, let loose with the chat, and we'll take a short break and we'll come back and have dinner. Please enjoy your company. Ladies and gentlemen, good evening once again, and now it's time to get down to the business end of the evening. It is my great honour to introduce the President of Chief Executive Women, Belinda Hutchinson. Belinda?
Thank you, Sue, and welcome everybody. On behalf of all the CEW members, we're just so delighted to have you with us this evening, and it's great to see so many friendly and familiar faces in the room. This is a very, very special event for CEW, and it's just amazing to see so many of you, and thank you for joining us. This is a real act of generosity, you all coming along, because this is a very important event because it allows us to raise money for our scholarship funds that Sue's already mentioned to you. Last year, CEW had its 25th anniversary, and we started with only 6 founding members. Today, we have 215 members around Australia. And many of our members are here tonight, and what I'd like our members to do is to stand up so that all our guests can see who you are. Please stand. Thank you, members. These are women who have all achieved great success in their careers, and they are CEW's ambassadors, so please take some time to talk to them this evening. As some of you already know, CEW is an organisation which focuses on providing a strong collegiate network for its women members. Through our regular events and programs, members provide mutual support to each other in enabling them to achieve career and personal success. More importantly, CEW is focused externally, and that is in order to really try and achieve our vision, which is the greater representation of women in business, government, and the not-for-profit sector. And this vision may sound simple, but as we all know, it has been a challenge over many years. It is pleasing to see some significant improvement this year and last year in terms of the number of women on the ASX 200 boards. We had an increase from 8 to almost 13% over the past 2 years, and last year 59 women were appointed to those boards. And this year we've got a success rate of 30% of appointments being women. In fact, one male director, I think it might be Kevin McCann who's here tonight, said last year, if you didn't wear a skirt, you wouldn't get a new board seat. Despite this progress, only 3% of CEOs of Australia's top companies are women, and 8% of senior executives. I thought a recent cartoon was clever and funny, which depicted one company executive saying to another, "We have strategically located the women's toilets on the lower floors." It is, however, not a laughing matter that women represent over 50% of university graduates, yet this talent pool is not represented at the top of our key organisations. What a glaring economic waste. So what is it that CEW is trying to do to improve the situation? CEW members see themselves as fortunate in having achieved a level of seniority in their careers and are keen to support other women to achieve success. We do this through a range of formal initiatives, including CEW's Talent Development Program, the CEO Kit, and CEW Scholarship Programs. CEW's Talent Development Program involves 100 female executives attending a one-year leadership program run by CEW members in Sydney and Melbourne. This program has been running for 5 years and is highly regarded by its participants and their companies as it challenges and inspires their professional development. The demand for this program continues to grow, so much so that we are launching in Brisbane next year. The CEO Kit is a diagnostic tool used by companies to analyse inhibitors and enablers for moving women into senior leadership positions in their companies. Sue Cato has already mentioned our scholarship program, and this year we are very excited to send 6 female executives to 2 leadership programs run by NCAD in Singapore. There is a bit of a silver lining to the high Australian dollar. We will also be sending a number of our winners of the not-for-profit sector scholarships to AICD's Company Directors course. The value of these programs is demonstrated by Helen Conway, who is here tonight with us. Helen is the new director of the Federal Workplace Gender Equity Agency and a previous senior executive at Caltex. Helen was one of CEW's earliest scholarship winners, and she has said to me it played a pivotal role in her career development. CEW is also active in thought leadership and advocacy, promoting the strong business case for gender equality. We have recently published, not published yet, but we're about to publish, a gender parity survey which we've undertaken with Bain & Co. That should be out in November. CEW members informally mentor and sponsor female executives in the businesses in which they work and through referral through their business networks. Well, enough of the serious work of CEW and on to some very special thanks to some sponsors who are here with us this evening. Firstly, I would like to acknowledge the generosity and commitment of our platinum sponsor, leading law firm Mallison Stephen Jakes. They have assisted us for over 5 years as our principal sponsor. Qantas also deserves special mention for giving us the amazing first and second raffle prizes. We also want to thank our remarkable gold sponsors ANZ, KPMG, Telstra and TAL, better known to most of us as Tower Australia. And last but not least, our valued silver sponsors, Aon Australia, Audrey Page and Associates, Commonwealth Bank, Dan Murphy's, Deutsche Bank, Egon Zehnder International, National Australia Bank, Pacific Brands, PwC, Transfield Services, UBS and Westpac. Without the extraordinary generosity of these organisations, our scholarship programs would not exist. Thank you on behalf of all the CEW members. I would also like to thank Sue Cato, who is so ably chairing our dinner committee. Sue flew in from New York today, and she's going great guns, and I just really want to thank you, Sue. I would now like to introduce our highly accomplished guest speaker. It is my great pleasure to introduce Amanda Wilson, who is the first female editor of the Sydney Morning Herald in its 180 years. Amanda is one of Australia's most experienced and respected newspaper journalists, with a career that has spanned almost 40 years here and overseas. She started her cadetship in Melbourne and worked as a reporter for the Sunday Telegraph and the Australian in Melbourne and Sydney before heading off to the UK in the early 1980s. In London, she was assistant editor for the Sunday Express and chief sub-editor of the Sunday Times. She returned to Australia to join the Sydney Morning Herald in 1994 as foreign editor, and since then, her roles in that newspaper have included deputy editor, weekend editor, spectrum editor, and news editor. Amanda is a proven leader in change management, newsroom team building, print and online integration, conflict resolution, complex negotiations, product development, and managing for the bottom line. Sounds like a multi-talented, multitasking, successful woman to me. As such, Amanda is a wonderful role model for aspiring female journalists and for all young women. In addition, she is a successful mum, having developed her career in journalism while bringing up her now 21-year-old son, Callum. It has been a riveting year for those creating, reporting and following the news, and we are looking forward to Amanda's inside view on the media world. Please join me in welcoming Amanda to the podium.
Thanks, Belinda, and good evening, everybody. Before I get down to all the serious stuff that I know you've come to hear me talk about, things like paradigm shifts and massive structural change in the media, I just want to correct the record. Apparently, some people think it's quite funny when I say, yes, I am the first woman in 180 years to edit the Sydney Morning Herald, but I don't actually think of myself as a woman. It's true, yes, professionally speaking, I haven't thought of myself in terms of gender. I've been in a very blokey profession for almost 40 years, but I always just got on with being a journalist and I left the gender wars to others. However, I do have one incontrovertible piece of proof that I am a professional woman. It is an email that I sent to the head of HR many years ago when Fairfax advertised for a new editor of the Sydney Morning Herald. I was in a senior role at the Herald at the time, and many respected colleagues said that I should apply for the job. So here's the thing. Only a woman would craft such an eloquent explanation of why she was not going to apply. Wrong timing, single mum, kid coming up for high school, elderly parents needing attention, and then there was that niggling doubt, which I expressed, that she wasn't ready for the top job. So all that stuff in an email and beautifully written. I even headed it, not the editor of the Sydney Morning Herald. So I think it's hard to imagine a man doing that. Perhaps it's hard to imagine anyone doing it, but I did. Anyway, I think a man would have expressed his doubts about his readiness to the bathroom mirror, perhaps, and that would have been it. So, look, obviously I got over all of that because I am here tonight, but I am living proof that there are many paths to leadership, and not all of them involve a crushing ambition, a serious string of letters after your name, and a personal life sacrificed for the corner office. Sometimes that path is winding because life keeps happening and you just manage it. You step forward, you step back, and you continue to work in whatever capacity you can manage so that the money keeps rolling in. My own straw poll of women who've made it to the top includes many who simply couldn't afford to take the time out. They needed the money to support their family and they had to keep working. So they decided if they had to keep working, putting in the hours, they may as well go for it. And when you add passion for what you do to that dogged determination to keep going, you have what they used to call a vocation. And somewhere in there, most women who shoot for the top, I think, realise that if they don't do it, they'll never know if they could have made a difference. So I'm not saying having a woman in charge always makes a difference for the better, because we're not all perfect and we're not all more talented because of our gender. A lot of us are, but how will you know if you don't have a go? And it's good for the country too, because if you'd read the Herald this weekend, just gone, you'd have seen Adele Ferguson and Jessica Irvine's piece in the Herald on women in executive roles. Now, Australia has some inspirational women in its past and present who gave it a go because of passion or circumstance or a twist of history, and I hope you're seeing photographs of them now as they come up. They made a difference. At one point earlier this year, we had our first female governor and Premier of New South Wales, our first female Governor-General and Prime Minister, and Australia finally got its first female editor of a major metropolitan daily broadsheet newspaper. The voters saw one of those women off, and time will tell how the others get on. And by the way, it says something about media around the world that Le Monde and the New York Times also only appointed their first female editors this year. So on the screens, you can see some other first Australian women. There were some milestones in the late 19th century when Bella Guerin became the first woman to graduate from an Australian university, and Constance Stone became the country's first female doctor. But then there was a bit of a gap. And you might be surprised to know that it wasn't until 1966 that the first woman was elected to Sydney City Council. And it wasn't until 1965 that Roma Mitchell was appointed the first female judge in the New South Wales Supreme Court. And it even took until 1970 for us to get our first female bus driver. And in 1980, 50 years after Nancy Bird Walton took to the skies as the first pilot, female pilot, Deborah Wardley won a 15-month battle to be allowed to fly as a commercial pilot. 15 months it took her. So there have been plenty of women whose names we may or may not know, but they also gave it a go. And as I'm speaking, you'll see some more beautiful images of women from Fairfax's photo library. Well, the Herald's photo library, because we've been taking photographs for 100 years. We celebrated that anniversary recently. So women really came into their own in the Second World War, and the Herald photographers went to town. And for me, the wonderful thing about the paper, the Herald, that I'm the editor of now, I have the privilege to edit, is that it's been here day in, day out for 180 years, recording the life and times of Sydney's women and men. It's a sad thing, but true, that often a woman's contribution remained unsung through these years until she made her curtain call on the obituaries page. And in among the big names there on our obits page, you'll find some wonderful women: the scientists, the teachers, the artists, nurses, doctors, writers, the adventurers, and the just plain naughty who got on with making a difference. And the Herald has been there for all of it. And some of our readers feel like they've been there for all of it too, that they're part of the fabric. They contribute letters, they love to be part of the conversation, and they never fail to let us know when we've stuffed something up. And like every great relationship, there's a bit of love-hate about it. I get the complaints, but I'm also privileged to hear some of the wonderful personal stories of the Herald's place in people's lives. When I met the actress Jackie Weaver a while ago, I congratulated her on her Oscar nomination. But what did she want to talk to me about? The Herald. She said she learned to read at the age of 3, sitting on her father's knee as he read the paper to her, and she's read it every day since. And at a lunch recently, a woman on my table said, "Oh, I love the Herald, I read it every day, it's like a religion for me." "Oh, fabulous," I said, "we need more readers like you." And she said, "Oh, tell me it's not true that newspapers are dying." And I said, "Well, they won't if people like you keep buying the paper." "Oh, no, I don't buy it," she said. "I read it in the cafe twice a week, and the other days my neighbour puts it through the fence for me when she's finished with it." Oh, terrific. Another one who thinks we're like the ABC, taxpayer funded. And Jerry Harvey thinks he's got problems. Sorry, Jerry. When I joined the Herald 15 years ago as foreign editor, I hadn't quite realised what an institution it was, because I grew up in Melbourne, where they have their own institutions. That would be the MCG, the Footy, Collingwood, the Bloods, which are now the Swans, that's for you, Belinda, and the Age. But the Herald has claimed an interesting place in Sydney life over the years, like these images you've been seeing. And our photographers have been capturing the highs and lows for all this time. And the picture archive is a real Sydney treasure trove, much of it digitised, but we still have an extraordinary collection of old glass negatives in storage that would simply take your breath away. And I love it because I love libraries. In the old days, when I started in newspapers straight from year 12, we still had an actual library. And my first job was in the Melbourne Bureau of the Australian, where I was hired as a copy girl. I thought they'd given me the job because there were hundreds of applicants. I thought, well, it's because of my brains, but I found out later it was because they realised I came from a theatrical family and they figured that someone raised by delusional actors would fit in perfectly. Well, they were right. I did. The journalists there were like my other family, and I couldn't believe that I was being paid to hang out with them. A copy kid is a gopher, and in those days you used to get around town in cabs collecting copy, which is stories from the journalists based at the Stock Exchange, Parliament House, police headquarters. And this was in ancient times, of course, before there were fax machines and you could send your stories in that way, or email, obviously. So I had to enter the lair of the Dragon Librarian to get files of newspaper cuttings and old photos. But this was good because down the hall were the journalists from Truth, which some of you may have heard of. It was a gossip newspaper. And what a shocking bunch of long-haired, sexist, dope-smoking drunks they were. So the only person who could keep them in line and away from me, because I was a little bit thinner in those days, was Helen the librarian, and her space was my refuge from them. And I loved it there. You could sift through files of meticulously labelled musty newspaper clippings and old photo prints marked up with the editor's black pencil. And it was magic, and that was the start of my journey. And when I was made a cadet journalist, which is a trainee, I was in the same News Limited offices, and I was number 2 in the 2-person Melbourne Bureau of the Sydney Sunday Telegraph. And number 1 in that bureau was a dashing reporter who dashed everywhere except to the office, and I was really left on my own to learn on the job. And when I had to write my first story, which was with an ageing British movie star, my boss was nowhere to be found. I came back from this interview and I had no idea how to start writing a story because nobody had ever taught me how to do it. So I was rescued by Elizabeth Auld, a very elegant, wonderful journalist who was one of the first and the best women journalists in Melbourne, and she retired that year. So she took me through my notes and she showed me how to find a hook on which to hang this interview. And that was my lesson in journalism. It was a good one though, and after that I was on my own. And I was very much on my own shortly after that when someone put a shotgun in my face. I bet that doesn't happen to you at work, no. This was during my first death knock. I was sent to interview a young woman whose fiancé had that morning jumped off the top of a tower block of flats, and he'd done it on the morning of their wedding. So the photographer drove me out to the woman's house, and he was very experienced. He stayed in the car. I went up the path and I knocked on the front door, and it was opened by a very big bloke wearing a leather jacket with the writing on it from a well-known motorcycle club. And I'd barely opened my mouth to introduce myself when he said, "She doesn't want to talk to you, so piss off." Well, I thought, fair enough. That's pretty definitive. Family likes its privacy. And so I went back to the car and we drove to a phone booth to call the news desk in Sydney because, of course, there were no mobiles then. And I told the boss what happened. Well, he didn't care. He said, "It's Saturday. This is the Sunday Telegraph. I want that story." I said, "But there's a bloody great big bikie there." And he said, "Go back. That's your job. Get the story." So I was at that point more scared of him than I was of the bikie. So I did what I was told. Now, where's HR when you really need them? Sorry, all you HR people out there. So I walked up the garden path, and alone again, because the photographer, as I said, was experienced, I knocked on the door, and this time when it opened, I didn't even get to open my mouth because he had a shotgun sort of pointed at me, and he said, "I told yous to piss off. Get moving." So I ran back to the car. The photographer had the engine running. I thought, this has got to be a good reason for not getting the story. And so I said to him, "I'm not phoning Sydney until we're back in the office and I can get you to back me up on the story." And so I learned a very important lesson that morning, which has served me well over the years, and it is this. Do not wear high heels if you think you might need to run away from a bikie with a shotgun. Anyway, I soon realised that the only way to escape the other office dragon, the shorthand teacher, was to run away to Hong Kong. And I wrote to the South China Morning Post and I told them I was a lot older than I really was, and I ended up joining as their education, health and social welfare reporter. And these were heady days when a 19-year-old innocent could sit for hours in the Foreign Correspondents Club and soak up the war stories from terribly glamorous journalists who were out from Vietnam and Cambodia for R&R. And this was the year of living dangerously writ large for me. I learnt to swear in Cantonese, drink super strength G&Ts at lunchtime and then return to the office and write umpteen news stories all in one day. I crammed several years of a Melbourne apprenticeship into one, and I learnt another very important lesson, which is that war correspondents are very good at making you feel sorry for them. I'm glad you got that joke. So the Herald's first female war correspondent was Connie Robertson, and she's up there now, in 1943. But from what I can learn, she actually never left Australia. They dressed her up in all these military clothes and they sent her on a tour of the Women's Army and Air Force camps, like outside Brisbane, and the photographers just loved it. And I guess it was because she'd been the women's editor and she wore great sunglasses and things. And then there was a bit of a gap, and then in 1966 the Herald appointed its first proper female foreign correspondent, and that was Margaret Jones, the wonderful Margaret Jones, who was sent to Washington. Unfortunately, though, at that time, women were excluded from the National Press Club, so she couldn't actually report on any of the major political speeches that were made there. But she did hear Harold Holt utter the words, "all the way with LBJ," at the White House. And then there's some terrific pictures in our archive of the very masculine Herald newsroom over the years, and there should be one up there. Oh, there it is. Well, it's not funny, actually. This is an election night in the 1970s, and I defy anyone to see a woman in that picture. Anyway, when I returned from my travels in the 70s, I moved to Sydney, and I again worked for The Australian, where I still found there were barriers. You could not, as a woman, join the superannuation fund until you had been an employee for 5 years. For men, it was 1 year. I guess they thought we were going to go off and have babies or something, and it would be a waste of money. Women had only recently been permitted to join the Sydney Journalists Club, which saved them from being snuck up the back stairs by more enlightened male colleagues who wanted someone nice to drink with. And there was only one woman editor at that time, and that was the arts editor. It was the same in Fleet Street when I got there a few years later. I phoned up the Daily Telegraph in London to see if they had any casual shifts. "Oh, terribly sorry," I was told, "but we don't have any ladies' lavatories here." And it's true, they did say that. But they did have facilities for women at the Financial Times and the Sunday Times, but still, in the 1980s, I was barred from the famous journalist's watering hole Elvino's in Fleet Street because I was wearing a trouser suit, and you couldn't wear trousers. So anyway, I guess my liver thanked them, because it's certainly quite relieved now that the long lunching days of journalism are a thing of the past. So over the years, I've thought about giving up all of this drama and the drama of other people's stories to get out of the newspaper game and do something with sensible hours where you're not captured by the 24-hour news cycle. It's actually incredibly draining, and many of my colleagues have given up or self-destructed along the way. When my son was about 8, someone asked him if he wanted to be a journalist when he grew up, and he said with some force, "No, they never see their children." I know it. So things like that, which see many talented women in my profession hit the wall. It's often not a glass ceiling, but a pair of pleading eyes, and that's just the dog. So from time to time, I would agonise over what kind of mum I was, especially those times when the kid was off school with a bug and I had to tuck him up under my desk with a pile of books from the literary editor's stash to keep him happy. And that's when I'd weigh up other options like media management or academia. But I couldn't do it because journalism gripped me by the throat all those years ago, and it still hasn't let me go. And besides, my son loved being under the desk at Mum's work. He turns 21 tomorrow, and he's a voracious reader. So I decided that to have a mother who follows her passion for storytelling while putting food on the table can't be all that bad. And so I juggled. I stepped up, down, sideways. I always went for the most interesting job that my mothering duties would allow. But I'm not saying this method would work for everybody, but it worked for me. And the fact that I wasn't in a hurry to crash through any ceilings really helped. But not that there wasn't pressure. At one point, one of my bosses wanted me to be night editor, which is a great leadership opportunity in the newsroom. I politely declined on the grounds that I would be starting work as my son's school day ended, and I'd be getting home about 5 hours before he woke up. And the only people who'd see him would be his teacher and his childminder. And my boss couldn't hide his irritation. He said, "When is this child problem going to end?" So, what's kept me going all these years apart from the need to earn a living? Probably the fact that being a journalist is a total privilege. People let us into their lives. They share the most extraordinary details of struggle, of achievement, of pain, of desire, hardship, rage, grief. People come to us when they care so deeply about something, they're prepared to risk everything to expose injustice or wrongdoing. Of course, politicians love to hate us, but there's a crazy symbiosis most of them find compelling. They love to use us as well. And all of that brings with it a huge responsibility because a journalist bears witness to somebody's story. The best journalists don't become the story. They keep their feet on the ground, they keep their scepticism healthy and their ethics intact. Good journalism makes a difference. It brings things to the attention of the community which might otherwise remain hidden by those with an interest in keeping information out of the public sphere. John Dewey, the American philosopher and psychologist, wrote, "Journalism creates a community of citizens who participate actively in public life in that community. The clear conscience of communal life in all its implications constitutes the idea of democracy." So I believe that my job is to run a newsroom that produces journalism for all times and all platforms. That is to say, a newspaper, a website, the iPad app, mobile phones, anything else that the changing technology throws at us. And I believe it's this kind of journalism, produced by people with passion and dedication and commitment to facts, which helps keep our community with a clear conscience and our democracy strong. So the job of editor brings with it a lot of flack, and that lands at my desk. Now, I've been engaging with our readers for years, and there's nothing new in it, but now the buck stops with me. I'm even more conscious of the need for me as editor to ensure that everyone in the newsroom at the Sydney Morning Herald understands that when we publish something, it reverberates. It might reverberate in Sydney, in the halls of power in Canberra, or in someone's family. But every reporter, every editor, every photographer, and everyone who answers a reader's query must understand the impact their work can have on other people's lives. Whether or not someone's life is lived in the public eye, I think the media can sometimes forget that they are also human beings. Some of the excesses of tabloid TV in Australia are a case in point. And in recent times, we've seen a cancer at the core of journalism, or whatever it is they call it at the News of the World, and I wouldn't call that journalism. The knowledge we now have, thanks to a whistleblower and dogged investigative journalism at The Guardian about what was going on at News International, has been a lesson to everyone who believes in a free press, freedom of speech, and the right to privacy. At the Herald this month, we introduced a new role of reader's editor in response to our readers demanding more engagement with the paper. And this isn't just a channel for complaints, we've already got a process for that, but it is the task of our readers editor, Judy Prisk, in this new role to explain how the newsroom works and to be a direct channel for our audiences in how we make our editorial decisions. It's become hugely important to apply much more critical thinking to what we do in the media. And I don't think that's confined to the media. I think everyone in this room will spend much of their working day considering how their firm or their department can become more engaged with and more responsive to the community, and also how all of your staff can become much more self-aware. Of course, if there's to be a debate around introducing laws to protect personal privacy, then the Herald and Fairfax Media will be part of that discussion, and it will be a complex debate. Technological advances mean there's potential for appalling intrusions, yet it may be difficult for regulators to keep up with the pace of change. There are millions of people who are unconcerned about posting the most excruciatingly intimate images and details of their lives, their relationships, their thoughts and feelings on social media, and all of that is freely available for anyone, including journalists, to see. And then there are the bigger questions of how to balance a reasonable level of personal privacy with the public's right to information, to freedom of speech, and the right of press freedom. And all these things are what we need in a thriving democracy. So there's very much to discuss. And freedom of speech must not be lost in this rush to protect privacy. Freedom of speech works both ways. It can offend as easily as it can enlighten. As editor, I see criticism from readers and other interested parties that the paper is too far to the left, and I see as much criticism that it's too far to the right. I'm asked how I can permit ex-commentator to write for the Herald when they are obviously too right-wing or too left-wing. And our readers editor tells me that it's this topic of our commentators on the opinion page that most consumed her in her first week. Balance, as I've discovered, is often in the eye of the beholder. When people stop complaining about this kind of thing, though, I know we're doing something wrong, that we've become boring. So my aim is to get it right, to play fair, and to make it interesting enough for readers to want to come back for more. We're not trying to get it wrong, of course, but if we do, we correct our errors in print. What readers on all sides hate is opinion masquerading as news, and I don't blame them. It's another interesting point for me that in this age of exploding social media, opinion is just busting out all over. Some of it stimulating, some of it rubbish, and much of it ill-informed. But now more than ever, people want their news unadulterated. So, what is my role in all of this? Well, if any of you have read Ian McEwan's novel Amsterdam, you'll know he describes an editor's day in detail. So much so that when I read it, I could feel the stress building and I almost had to reach for my meditation CD. It's a great book. It shows how incredibly busy it is. So a good editor is fair-minded, they have a vision, they have thick skin, and they know how to lead a group of talented people with very strong egos. When I took on this role, one of my writers gave me some invaluable advice, that being an editor was like being a manager of an opera company, where everyone's a diva or a touchy tenor. And he, of course, included himself among the tenors. Greg Highwood, my CEO, describes it as being like a roadie for a rock band. You do all the hard slog to get the rock stars up on stage and keep them there, of course, and then you stand back and let the magic happen. Well, growing up in a theatrical family where there was one big star and a lot of little lights trying to shine, there's nothing I don't know about living with creative genius. No one is ever happy with their work. Everyone wants star billing. Every rejection is a tragedy of Shakespearean proportions. The more over the top your praise, the better. And when there's a stuff up, it's always your fault. So J.D. Pringle, who was twice editor of the Herald in the 60s and the 70s, and the editor who sent Margaret Jones to Washington, described the editor as needing physical, mental, and moral toughness. He said they have to be physically tough to withstand the strain of the long hours of work at night, the constant interruptions. They had to be mentally tough to make all of the constant decisions about a million different things, and morally tough to withstand all the various pressures brought to bear. So 9 months into my job, which I think is a very short gestation period for an editor, I have to agree with Pringle that you need to be tough. So for me, the learning curve is as steep as ever, and I think running the Australian Opera would be a piece of cake. If Mr. Terracini is here, I apologise for that remark. For me, every day is a new beginning. I start with a very busy schedule of meetings with the other editors and staff, with marketing, HR, my publisher, the commercial side, the finance manager, clients or community groups. But all that changes in a flash. It might be that awful moment when a plane goes into a building, when a giant wave starts rolling in, when a coup happens in some Canberra corridor, or when men in combat gear break into a fortress in some unlikely sounding place like Abbottabad. But these are the days when everything is dropped and the news takes over. So the editor spends a large part of every day making decisions at crisis level, and there's usually a queue outside the door of people wanting more decisions. To spend several hours mulling over a decision seems slow. To spend a day is a luxury, and yet having the strength to sit on a decision is something people look to me to do. So if 80% of my decisions turn out to be okay, I think I'm on track. There's pressure from within, because all my sopranos and tenors want to be on page one. And sometimes the church and state divisions of commercial and editorial all meet at my door. And then there's pressure from outside, from politicians, business people, readers. And then there's all the free advice I get every time I go out for dinner. So, as John Pringle wrote, a newspaper is a public thing. Now, he wrote this in the 60s. There's pressures that may come from the management, who may, and almost certainly will, lean on the editor to do this or that, or from politicians who ring up in tones of either injured innocence, "I'm very hurt that you should think that, John." So you can put in any politician you like here, federal or state. Or they ring up in furious anger, "I regard it as a monstrous lie, and I want you to know that I'm taking it up personally with the CEO," or from the staff or the public. He said, Pringle wrote, "I would be enjoying a dinner party on a Saturday night trying to forget the Herald and all its work when some ass would turn to me and say, 'That was a lot of bullshit in the Herald this morning.'" I know exactly how he feels. Nothing has changed. So, here are my challenges. I have to manage all the sopranos. I have to be like a Zen sponge who can absorb all the flack without biting back. I have to keep giving the Herald's readers and audiences accurate, incisive news that they can trust and intelligent, independent thinking. And then I have to do that all in a form that they're prepared to pay for. Yes, news you pay for. Interesting concept. This is where I talk about the paradigm shift and the structural change that's coming into it. So, newspapers are doing much better in Australia than in other first world countries, but for how long? The web, the smartphones, the tablets, they're all very handy, very easy. But the key for me in all of this is to keep the newsroom vibrant so that wherever you read it, you are taking part in Dewey's idea of a conversation with a community of citizens. The narrowing of media ownership and the shrinking of media outlets as newspapers and magazines fold is another concern for those who are interested in the free flow of information and ideas. Again, John Pringle was insightful on the role newspapers play in providing a rational national debate. He said, "It's more important to be reasonable than to be right. To be right on every one of the hundreds of issues, serious and trivial, which find their way onto an editor's desk is an impossible ideal. In a democracy, a newspaper may be doing a useful service if it argues fairly and logically a view which may subsequently prove to be wrong. What is important is that there should be other papers arguing different views. An editor is not God. He or she is part of the democratic process by which a nation argues and blunders its way towards the truth. Once one accepts this, it is more important to be fair to one's opponents, who may after all turn out to be right, than to score points off them. One should try to reason, to persuade, not to bully or bludgeon. It is an editor's final duty to the principles of rational debate." So, I know you're all tired of me speaking, so I'd like to close by passing on some advice that was given to me by a dear friend in New York late last year when I was mulling over whether or not I really had all the strengths that I knew I needed to take on this huge job. So I still don't know if I have those strengths, but I finally decided to give it a go. So my friend is a retired shrink. Her words are for all those women who'd like to step up, but who can think of a million good reasons why it's not the right time. And this would have been really good advice for me who emailed HR all those years ago. Amanda, she said, stop getting in your own way. There's enough assholes out there who'll do it for you. Just get on with it. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, Caroline Coops from Allison's will give an appropriate thank you for that speech in a few moments. In fact, after the raffle, so it'll be more than a few moments. But could I just say a couple of things, Amanda? Thank you for that. It was extraordinarily human. And Lord knows enough of us in the room who, because of recent events, have had our faith in journalism and media challenged on occasion. I actually think you've done a lot to restore some of that faith for the people in the room tonight, so thank you. Now, looking for my fabulous Qantas and CW family volunteers, the raffle, the chance to buy the raffle tickets will close in about the next 5 or 8 minutes, and the draw will begin. So buy, guys, buy. Where are my volunteers? Okay, go for it, guys. Are there any tables who haven't bought raffle tickets who would like to buy raffle tickets? Okay.
How are we going to do this?
Head down there. We'll do it in about 5 minutes.
Okay, just stay with me for a sec. So how are we
Guys, so the volunteers, we've got people down the end. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll come back in a few minutes. Thank you. Could we have all the volunteers to the front of the room, please? No one's listening. Ladies and gentlemen, we're about to stop the selling of raffle tickets. Ladies and gentlemen, the moment has arrived. The most exciting part of the evening, especially if you're a prize winner. Table 31. Ladies and gentlemen, to the naughty tables down the back.